Hey folks, I'm Sandrico and I'm a software dev. And sometimes people will ask me, what do I actually do all day? And usually I'll tell them something like, oh, I make websites. I make specific websites. I work on servers, those kind of things. And while all that is true, I think it might be helpful for me to go into a little bit more detail so that what I actually do becomes a little bit more relatable. So on my screen here, I've got a couple of files and a text editor. You don't need to worry about which text editor I'm using. Fun fact, there are many of them. I've got a browser over here. Which browser I'm using also doesn't matter. But we can see on this page that all I've got right now is hello world. And then over here, we've got some code. So in my day-to-day work, a lot of what I do is what I will call front-end development. So that's kind of the realm of the things that you see on a page. So your buttons that you click or the headings of the text and so on and so on. So over here, we can see that on line 12, I've actually got something that says hello world. And in short terms, this hello world essentially equates to this hello world over here. And just to prove that to you, I can change this, make it say test, and it says test. And then I can switch that back, and now it says hello world. Now, how this actually gets from here to over here is something called the DOM. And in short terms, the DOM is kind of a tree of elements, like this H1 tag, that browsers know how to interpret into web pages. So when it comes to HTML, what we do as software devs is we'll build the trees via putting elements in code that the browser can then go and interpret and show you on a web page. So right now I've got a couple of elements in my HTML file. So I've got the H1, which we've already seen, is the hello world. H1 stands for header one or heading one. And then we've got other things like a head, a body, and so on and so on. The head is a little bit different. It tells the browser a little bit more about the website instead of actually putting things on a page. Like for example, we see that this is the title here. Now we don't see it up here because I'm in dev mode, but if I show you all the tabs I have open, we can see what is software development, question mark. I can change this to an exclamation point, save it. This will reload, and then we can see that that is now a question mark. So in short terms, HTML or hypertext markup language equates to the actual things that you see on the page. Now, I've got another file over here, which is style.css, and CSS stands for cascading style sheets. And the important part is the style sheet. So essentially, what CSS is going to give me is all of the styling for the HTML elements that I put on the page. So just to show that as an example, I can look at this H1 tag here that we already put on the page, and we saw that this is already here, and these two are the same thing. And then I can go over here, and then you can target HTML elements that you want to style. So for example, right now this hello world is black. So over here in my CSS, I can target the H1, and then I can say I want its color to be red. And then we can see over here that it changed based on the CSS that we added in the target. Or I can say I want its font size to be 200 pixels. And then we can see it gets really large. So it is the styling to the HTML. If you want to put it in an analogy, I kind of like to think of it as a fashion analogy, whereas HTML is the mannequin that you build, and CSS is clothes that you put on the mannequin, so to speak. Now, one question you might have is, how does the CSS and the HTML talk to each other? Well, one way that you can do that, and the way that I have it set up here, is through something called a link tag. A link tag is kind of self-explanatory. It lets you link in other files into your HTML. And in this case, we can see that this rel, it's called an attribute. HTML elements, a lot of them have attributes that customize what they do. For the style sheet, I can tell this link tag that it's a style sheet, and its href is the path to the file that I want to link to, and therefore I want to link the style sheet. So then when the browser is going through and trying to figure out how do I reconcile or match these HTML elements in the style sheet together, then this is how the browser knows that, oh, okay, I actually need to go find this style sheet because it has styles that I need to include whenever I'm putting things on the page. The last file that I have here is main.js, and if you want to think about it in our mannequin example, JS or JavaScript is the actions that your mannequin could do. So HTML gives the mannequin an arm, CSS puts a watch on that arm, and then JavaScript is telling the mannequin that it can wave its arm. So for example, I'm going to add another HTML element here. That's a button, and it's going to say click me. Actually, I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. There we go. So we have this click me button over here. Now, this click me button currently doesn't do anything. One way that we can verify that is by clicking it. Another way that we can verify that is in the browser's inspect tab. Oh, sorry, that was my cat. It's in the browser inspect tab. So if I click on it, we can see another little drawer pops up, and there's a bunch of tabs open down here. One of the tabs is elements, and if we click on elements, we can see all the HTML elements that we added to the page so far. Like there's our H1 and there's our button. Now, if I go over to console, this is where you can log things based on what's happening on the page, or when an action happens, or so on and so forth. You got a lot of flexibility here. So this main.js file, since it allows us to give functionality to our HTML elements, you can target HTML elements and then make them do things. So first we need to target the button, for example. So we can say const click me button equals document dot query selector, and we only have one button, so that should work. And then we can say click me button dot on click console.log you clicked me, and then we save that. Oh, and then we say click me button is not a function. Okay, so we need to debug this. Okay, so I skipped a little bit there, I ran into an issue, but I got the code working. Now, kind of like in our CSS, we had to target the click button that we set up in our HTML so that we can actually make it do something. So up here we have a click me button that equals something called a document.querySelector and then button. So just to break that down a little bit, this button essentially equates to this button here. Now, there are many ways you can target something, but just to keep it simple and easy, since we only have two elements, button is simple. But say, for example, if you had two buttons and you only wanted to target one of them, then you'd have to start getting a little more specific with various using various methods. But for now, we just got one button. So we're targeting our button. Now, query selector this just allows us to target specific things in the DOM. It's a little bit self-explanatory because in the name it says selector, and then there's query. So I'm asking something to select button, and then the thing that I'm asking is the document. So the document is what the browser takes in from our code that it interprets to then load things onto the page. So when I click all of these things over here, all of these elements equate to a document, which is essentially a tree of elements or nodes that the browser can then read and render for you. So hello world, click me is in a tree of nodes, and then that tree of nodes gets interpreted by the browser into HTML on the page. So then we've got this click me button, and then down here is another new thing, which is add event listener. So add event listener just it essentially lets us listen for particular actions that happen to HTML elements. So what I think makes it really clear is that right after that in the bracket you see click. So this is saying I want to take the click me button that I targeted, and then I want to listen for an event, and the event I want to listen for is click. And then after that, you'll see, just let me highlight this here, you'll see this block of code that I've got highlighted here is a function. And functions provide functionality to something. So in this case, the functionality that I'm providing is in my listener, when a click happens, I want you to console.log this. And we talked about the console tab, which allows us to log things out, and we can see console.log. So now, when I click the click me button, it should show you clicked me, which is what we have here. And just to prove it, we can say this is uppercase, we'll save it. We don't need to worry about those messages there. And then we click me again, and then we can see that it's uppercase. So with that, we've got our HTML, our CSS, and our JavaScript. It's a very simple example, but I think it's a good way to show the very basics of how what you see on the browser gets into the browser. You definitely get way more complicated when you start building much larger things, but in a nutshell, everything kind of equates down to HTML that is styled via CSS and given functionality via JavaScript. So yeah, whenever you wonder what I or another software developer does all day, this is a large aspect of what we do to put websites on the page. There are many different aspects of it. There are the servers that provide functionality, and then there's the whole pipelines in between that take it from these files to your browser, where you can just type in a URL and you get it. So in very simple terms, that's a lot of what I do all day, and what a lot of other software developers do all day. So yeah, if you like this video, would love a like, give me a subscribe, would love that too. I hope you learned something new, and yeah, hoping to put more content out in the future, so check back in soon. You have a nice day.